Let me introduce our rep from District 40, Keith Ammon. He is the rep for Hollis, Milford, Mount Vernon, and New Boston. He is the assistant majority whip, thankfully, in the general court. He's the clerk of the Commercial and Consumer Affairs Committee. In his spare time, he's a small business owner, he's a technology enthusiast, and he's also a private pilot. So, Keith, thank you and welcome.
Thanks everyone for coming, and I'll try to give you a synopsis on what's happening at the State House up until this point. Again, my name is Keith Ammon. I serve in a super district that includes Hollis, and this is going on my third term. So this has been probably one of the most controversial bills, or at least that I ever put in. And I knew that going in. So the genesis of House Bill 544, what was House Bill 544? It came from a university professor at one of our state universities who said in his or her course of employment that the critical race theory concepts were creeping in, and he was afraid to speak out about it because for fear of being called a racist. The genesis of the bill, the language of the bill, came from an executive order that Trump put in back in September. And that has kind of triggered some people to oppose it no matter what because Trump did it. But that's where the language started from. And then we adapted it. We used the drafting attorney at the State House to adapt that language to fit our state. And so I was going to go over a little bit about what the bill talks about. I can touch on critical race theory a little bit. We haven't really just defined it, okay? So maybe we'll start with that. Critical race theory is a critical theory that came out of academia back in the 70s, 80s. A group of people that thought the civil rights movement that Martin Luther King spearheaded or was very influential in didn't go far enough, that they didn't make enough progress. And so they adapted ideas that actually come from Marxism. The critical theory school of thought traces back to the Frankfurt School in the 30s. So these are Marxist ideas. And you can tell that because what Marxists like to do is divide a society into two groups and pit those groups against each other so that they can usher in eventually, the thinking goes, a whole new system, a communist system. So I think Lily will talk a little bit about what happened in China and how that's similar. We know Marx talked about the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, the working class and the capital class. This is just another way to divide people. And it does it on the most superficial aspect. Our genetic code, each of our individual genetic codes, are so similar. The color of our skin makes almost no difference in the code that makes us who we are. It's such a superficial thing, but this is what they're focusing on. So I'll talk a little bit about 544. You've probably heard people losing their minds about the bill, and they attack it, and they say it's against free speech, they say it's racist, they say it's transphobic. They keep adjusting their attacks, and that's kind of been amusing over the last few months. I do want to start by saying that, America is not a racist country, right? Can we all agree on that? America is not systemically racist. The first time I heard this word, if you say you deny systemic racism, the left, the people that support this stuff, they lose their minds. Like they can't believe you're saying that. Systemic racism, when I first heard it, my naive ears, it sounds like they're talking about racism. We all know racism has existed. As long as the human race has existed, racism has existed. But we know in our country we have, some things that were that we've had to correct over the years. But when they say, when critical race theorists say systemic racism, what I found out by looking into it a little more deeply is that what they really mean is the entire system of our country, from its founding, was designed to perpetuate racism and to oppress some certain groups, and therefore the system needs to be overturned. We need a new system. We need to throw it out and create a whole new system. That's what they're saying when they say systemic racism. So, I think our country is systemically self-healing and systemically self-correcting. I think that's a good way to think about it. That, the more perfect union is what we're striving for. So what critical race theory does, first thing we mentioned, it takes a view of the United States, and when they say system, they mean every institution. They mean all the state governments, they mean the court systems, they mean, the police department. It's all the systems were designed. The rules that you use in committee, Sue, the rules to, Mason's rules, all that stuff is designed to perpetuate racism, to give one group an advantage over another. So that's the first thing that they think, or that they purport. The second thing is that based on how much melanin in your skin, the different shades of skin colors, that you can separate society into two groups, and it's the oppressed and then the oppressors. Those are the two groups. And when they talk about anti-racism, that's another term that seems innocuous, anti-racism. What they're saying is you have to look for racism everywhere. You have to see racism in every interaction between people and actively confront it and root it out. That's what they're saying when they say anti-racism. It is a hyper-focus on race, which all that does is divide us, right? If everything that we see on TV, every person that we see, if the first thing we think about is the color of their skin, that divides us as a nation, as a state. So that's why we're going against this stuff. So 544, the original text, it doesn't ban the teaching of critical race theory. That's kind of a misnomer. It doesn't ban teaching about it. What it does is it bans certain aspects of it from being advocated for. So there's a difference, right? So an example would be, creationism. Some people believe the earth was created in 6 days. How long those days were, we don't know. Different ideas about that. You can talk about, some people believe in creationism, for instance, but a teacher can't pass or fail a child for believing or disbelieving in creationism. They can't advocate that that's the only way that things work, right? That's a decision that is made at home with the parents. That's not something the school should be doing. And so, that's what 544. This 544 is not a magic bullet. What it is a shot across the bow. It's these are things that reasonable people can believe, and reasonable people can say taxpayer money shouldn't fund this stuff. And I'll read some of the list. And just encroaching on the critical race. Two pages, he cites case law, he cites different examples. And here's what it boils down to. And this is really interesting, it helps us hone in our understanding of the Constitution. But freedom of speech applies to individuals. It doesn't apply to the government or the agents of the government. They don't have freedom of speech. So for instance, a public school teacher can't teach. For one, according to state statute, they can't. They can't teach RSA 191. They can't promote communism in our schools. That's in state law. Or the overthrow of our government. They can't do that by state law. So, imagine if a teacher had freedom of speech unlimited, they could advocate for the KKK. They could say, everybody should join the KKK. That's silly, right? We wouldn't ever give school teachers that much where they can say anything. Teach history instead of math, whatever. So that's an important thing. Freedom of speech. Individuals have freedom of speech. They can advocate for critical race theory all they want, but when they're in the government position and they're using government dollars, they don't have freedom of speech. And it's the legislature's job to put limits on that. That's what we should do. And the last thing is it doesn't apply to any private sector institutions, including private schools, private colleges. It doesn't touch the private sector. It only has to do with what the state is funding with our tax dollars. So hopefully that gives you some ammunition. Kevin mentioned the word equity. So they took 2 letters out of the word equality and they turned it into equity, right? So the United States, we stand for equality. Equal, we're all equal before God. Equity is something completely different, even though it sounds good, right? It sounds the same. What's that? It's about outcome based, right? It's the fact that everybody crosses the finish line at the same time. And that is a Marxist idea, that the government needs to redistribute things to even it all out and make it even. That's a Marxist idea. So watch out for that word equity. Don't have naive ears, like attune yourself to the words that they're using. Anti-racism, equity, you know, all these things, like we need to inoculate ourselves from them. So anyway, that's a good overview, and I think I ran a little long, but thank you.